The Minister's Wife. Selmer, Tennessee, was reportedly named for Selma, Alabama. Perhaps the R was added because of the way local dialect pronounced it. Located in West Tennessee, Selmer is the county seat of McNairy County, the kind of southern town where people tend to know one another. Many residents belong to extended family clans. Few citizens are wealthy. The median income is $38,000 a year, and a sixth of Selmer's people live below the poverty level. There is a small hospital there, an elementary school, a middle school, and a high school. There are a few family-type restaurants and, of course, a Walmart. In many ways, it's a Mayberry kind of town where most people smile and say hello to everyone and wave at drivers passing by. They eat dinner at noon, not lunch. They eat supper in the evening. McNairy County had its own almost fictional sheriff in the 1960s and 1970s. Sheriff Buford Pusser became famous as a crusader, a tremendously tall man carrying a big stick who waged war against corruption in his county, whether it was suspect politicians or bootleg whiskey stills. In August 1964, he and his wife, Pauline, were ambushed and she was shot fatally. Buford lived almost exactly 7 more years, his face scarred by the bullets that killed Pauline. Immortalized in the Walking Tall films by actor Joe Don Baker, Pusser died at 37 as he lived, in a highly suspicious auto crash. His legend hasn't faded and his life is still honored. Icons and folktales he left behind still attract tourists. Long after Pusser's term in office, McNairy County has been tarnished by rumors of corruption, and Sheriff Tommy Riley was convicted in October 2005 of facilitation of jail escape, but avoided a verdict of official misconduct. One of the women in the county jail became pregnant after alleged intimate encounters with a jailer. Riley was charged with helping expedite her escape so that she could have an abortion. Through judicial diversion, Riley kept his job and avoided a 3 to 6 year jail term. He was sentenced instead to 3 years of supervised probation. District Attorney Elizabeth Rice demanded that he be ousted from office, however, citing bad judgment on the part of the presiding judge. Most of Selmer and McNairy County is home to far more ordinary people who respect the law. Cotton, soybeans, corn, wheat, and hay grow in the fields that surround Selmer, and many farmers also raise horses, cows, and hogs. Loggers cut down trees and deliver them to sawmills. Scrap metal is the other main industry for the men of Selmer, and there are junkyards piled high with crushed cars and worn-out appliances awaiting transformation. And then there are preachers and others at the 24 churches in town. Located near the center of the Bible Belt, Selmer has needed its churches. The 4,500 residents in Selmer might well wonder what kind of unlucky star has crossed over their town in the past decade and a half. Devastating tornadoes have touched down in Selmer, wreaking millions of dollars in damage and taking lives. In 2007, dark shadows continued to hover over Selmer. NASCAR racing is a tremendously popular sport in the South, and along with an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 other fans, Selmer residents were looking forward to the annual Cars for Kids show on the weekend of June 16th and 17th. It was a huge draw in this small town, and usually raised at least $200,000 for charities that benefit children. The parade was a hit on Saturday, but a modified drag race at 6 p.m. on Mulberry Avenue, a city street without barriers to hold the crowd back or protect them, ended in disaster. It was intended to be a controlled burnout. The race cars' rear tires spin until they blow out, while the brakes are on for the front wheels. The stunt generally produces clouds of dark smoke, thrilling crowds. Something went horribly wrong, however, with this burnout. The car fishtailed into a light pole, and then plunged into the crowd, killing 6 young spectators, aged 15 to 22. 2 of the dead were sisters. 23 others were injured as the race car cut a swath through the crowd, trapping those who couldn't run fast enough. All of Selmer wept, and on Sunday night a crowd gathered at the Sonic Drive-In on Mulberry Avenue to mourn the young victims. One of the teenage girls who was killed had been at work there just before the demonstration, leaving cheerfully to stand close to the road and watch the black smoke roil. Many people wrote to the Jackson Sun, placing blame on the sport, the fatal driver, the police, and even on the heedless spectators. A few lumped this tragedy in with the Winkler case, wondering what in the world Selmer was coming to. In actuality, there were no similarities between an ill-thought-out drag race and the shocking death of one of Selmer's most admired citizens. Still, people tended to ask why so much that was dark and deadly descended on a little town in Tennessee. Both the dragster horror and the Winkler story made headlines all across America, causing complete strangers to ask the same thing. It was the first day of spring 2006 when the marriage of the Reverend Matthew Winkler and his wife, Mary Carroll, teetered on the edge of catastrophe. The day was clear and somewhat cool, and daffodils and tulips in bloom were buffeted by the wind. Trees were just budding out, but their branches were essentially bare. In another few weeks, it would be full spring, and the azaleas, irises, lilies, and crepe myrtles would brighten up Selmer. The parsonage of Matthew's church was a neat small house that sat above Molly Drive in Selmer. It wasn't lavish, but the one-story structure was cozy-looking, built of brick, with 4 white columns in front and multi-paned windows with black shutters. The home had a good-sized lot, but the Winklers' lawn and shrubs showed signs of neglect. Apparently neither of them had the interest or the time to worry about landscaping. The grass was raggedy, with raw patches of dirt, and there were no bulbs in bloom. Matthew, 31, was the youth minister at the 4th Street Church of Christ, and Mary, 32, appeared to be the perfect preacher's wife, supporting him in all of his church duties. In this denomination, the husband's role is far more important than the wife's. Matthew made all the decisions while Mary, if not actually obeying him, deferred to him in all matters. Quiet, sweet-voiced, Mary fit her role well. On Tuesday, March 21st, she began her first day as a substitute teacher at the Selmer Elementary School. Although the pay wouldn't be much, it would help their budget. Unless they are television evangelists, preachers don't make large salaries, and Matthew and Mary had 3 little girls to raise. Patricia Diane, 8, Mary Alice, called Allie, 6, and Brianna, who had just had her first birthday. It would have taken a very large salary, however, to solve the Winklers' financial woes. They were deeply in debt, both with their credit cards and because of an unfortunate business move. Media reports would refer to the Winklers as the perfect all-American family, but that is standard boilerplate journalism. People who live next door to serial killers always refer to them as the nicest guy you could ever hope to meet, or they say, knowingly after the fact, "I always thought there was something creepy about him." Reporters never describe a family hit by violent tragedy as the rotten, dysfunctional family, even when it is. They thrive, instead, on positive descriptions so they can counterpoint that image more effectively with whatever disaster has struck the family down. So couples viewed from the outside are invariably described as loving, happy, and devoted. Nobody really knows what goes on behind closed doors, and it doesn't matter at all if those shut away by walls and drapes are factory workers, doctors, lawyers, or preachers. All of these occupations have been populated from time to time by men and women whose lives suddenly erupted in scandal. Even so, a minister, his wife, and his children, a family moving in a world that is shaped by the church they serve, are expected to maintain a facade. That may be why any number of PKs, preachers' kids, turn out to be wild and rebellious. They are so often teased by peers that they act out to show they're just like anybody else. The preachers themselves have an equally hard row to hoe. It's not easy for those who are supposed to teach, by example, to maintain a serenity that can often mask dissension and worries. And when they do have problems, ministers and their wives don't have the luxury of confiding in members of the congregation. The people Matthew Winkler preached to wanted to believe in him, and they wanted to see Mary as a loyal, devoted, and contented wife. For a long time, the Winklers were able to be the couple that their families and their congregation wanted. Even though they moved frequently, every time Matthew was called to a new church, Even though Mary suffered a miscarriage in 2003 between Allie's birth and Brianna's, even though they sometimes worried about money, and even though they had serious disagreements about the sexual part of their union. Matthew Winkler was a handsome, dark-haired man, 6 feet 1 inch tall. He had been extremely good-looking in college when he attended Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee. Now he was thick around the middle at 235 pounds, and he had lost his clean chin line. But he was still attractive, and he hadn't lost his charisma. He was definitely the kind of preacher young people could identify with, and probably a few of the teenage girls in his congregation had a crush on him. His younger church members called him Wink, after his last name, and not because he was in any way a flirt. There was never even a whisper that he wasn't faithful to his wife, or that she wasn't faithful to him. Mary was both pretty and plain, if such a thing is possible. At 5 feet 1, she was a full foot shorter than Matthew, and she weighed 150 pounds, although no one would have guessed she was that heavy. She carried it well with good posture, despite her full bosom. She had dark brown hair, cut in a short bob that wasn't particularly flattering to her round face. Her high, rounded forehead gave her a resemblance to actresses Winona Ryder and Christina Ricci. Her skin was lovely. She had even features, and she was very pretty when she smiled. She didn't wear much makeup, which was to be expected of a preacher's wife, and her preference in clothes was for something tailored rather than ruffled. Mary dressed in solid colors, and often wore black and white. Her place was always just behind Matthew. He was the one who stirred church members with his sermons, while she taught Sunday school to toddlers. Matthew was usually smiling in his photographs, while Mary wasn't. But then maybe it's easier to view her that way in retrospect, knowing what happened. Staff members at the Selmer Elementary School noticed that Mary Carol Winkler seemed nervous, even upset, on March 21st. Apparently, her distress wasn't due to her starting a new teaching job, but because of something else. Coworker Casey Broadway noticed that Mary was talking a lot on her cell phone while she was at the grade school, and that she paced nervously in the hallway as she did so. Some of the teachers complained about it. Once, Casey thought that Mary was actually crying. She didn't ask her any questions. That would be invading Mary's privacy. Later that Tuesday, around 4, Matthew was seen walking the Winkler's dog in the city park. He wasn't needed at the church that night. A bank officer in Selmer would recall talking to Mary several times on the 21st and attempting to get a commitment from Mary that she and Matthew would come into the bank to discuss a puzzling overdraft in their account. Lots of families get into minor trouble when they don't keep up with their checkbook entries. Other than that, there were no ominous forebodings that signaled trouble in the Winkler home. That would change the next day, March 22nd. Mary didn't go to work, and their older daughters didn't go to school either. They were expected at softball practice at school later in the afternoon, but they didn't show up. When neither Matthew nor Mary was present at Wednesday night services, church members began to worry. They were always at church on Sunday mornings and Wednesday evenings, unless they called to say they were ill or had other pressing reasons not to attend. But they hadn't phoned in, and calls to the parsonage went unanswered. Dr. William Drew Beeson, who was both an elder in the congregation of the 4th Street Church of Christ and a family friend, was concerned enough to drive to the Winklers' Molly Drive home shortly after 7:30 p.m. No one answered his knock, and the front door was locked. At 9 p.m., Dr. Eason returned, accompanied by 3 other church elders. They found a key hidden in a fishing tackle box, unlocked the door, and walked into the silent house, calling out for Matthew and Mary. None of their worries could have prepared them for the shock they experienced when they entered the master bedroom. Matthew was there, lying on his back on the floor between the 4-poster bed and the bathroom. He was entangled in sheets, blankets, and pillows from the bed. The bedside table and a lamp with an elephant base and a tiny flame-shaped bulb were wedged between his still form and the closed bathroom door. It looked at first glance as though he had gotten out of bed, tripped and fallen, grabbing at the table and the bedclothes as he collapsed heavily. Dr. Eason moved closer, however, and saw that there was pink-tinged white foam coming from Matthew's nose and mouth. His eyes were open, but he was dead. What Drew Eason saw could not be real. It was as if the men had walked into a nightmare, one that didn't compute with what they knew about their pastor. It was 20 minutes after 9 when Eason called Selmer Police Chief Neil Burks's office to report that Matthew Winkler was dead and that his wife and children were missing. Burks and his men responded and realized almost at once that they would need help. They alerted detectives from the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Roger Rickman, an investigator with the Selmer Police Department with a quarter-century of police experience, was one of the first to arrive at the parsonage. He saw that Matthew Winkler had apparently died where he lay. He wore a red undershirt, a green long-sleeved shirt, and what could be called either pajama or lounging pants. The minister's arms were flung out, with his right hand touching the bathroom door and the left extending under the bed. His right leg was straight, and his left leg was bent at the knee so that his ankles were crossed. At first glance, there wasn't much blood apparent, save for the froth from his mouth, which probably indicated some sort of injury to his lungs. But when the investigators turned the husky minister over, they found that he had lost almost all the blood in his body, bleeding out from a gunshot wound located to the left of his spinal column in the lower thoracic area, just above his waist. The bedding and the carpet beneath it were soaked with mostly dried blood. Whatever internal wounds Winkler had, his immediate cause of death would probably have been through exsanguination. He had bled to death. He could not have survived such an injury, even if emergency medical care had been summoned immediately. But it was possible that he might have been alive and conscious for a very brief period after he'd been shot. Only an autopsy could discover the full extent of his injuries. There was, of course, immediate concern for Mary Winkler and their 3 little girls. They weren't anywhere in the house, and the family's Toyota Sienna minivan was missing from the driveway. Had Matthew Winkler died trying to protect his family from someone who had broken into their home during the night before? Were Mary and the girls now hostages of a maniac? Every scenario that came to mind was terrifying. While most members of church congregations revere their ministers and their families, there are always those whose mental balance is a bit off-center. Was there someone in the 4th Street Church of Christ who had snapped suddenly, or even harbored a long-held hatred for the preacher? Had he killed Matthew before abducting his family? Or had some stranger broken into their home the night before? Both were ominous possibilities. If Matthew had been killed in a home invasion robbery, something should be missing. And yet the detectives saw his money clip on the dresser with a good-sized wad of cash still in it. His driver's license was there, too. A check of the other rooms in the house was a tiny bit reassuring. There were no signs of blood or struggle anyplace, but in the master bedroom. Still, Winkler's family was gone, and Mary hadn't called to summon help for her husband. No one had heard from her, and that was frightening. One small woman and 3 little girls might be at the mercy of a killer, hurtling over highways hundreds of miles from home. The parsonage was cordoned off with crime scene tape. Officers were stationed to protect the outside premises throughout the night, and investigators worked inside to gather any evidence they could find that might lead to the person or persons who had shot the young preacher in the back with a high-powered weapon. The beginning of rigor mortis and the temperature of Matthew Winkler's body indicated that he had probably been dead for more than 12 hours. In 12 hours, his family could be anywhere. John Vinson, the medical examiner of McNairy County, ordered the removal of Winkler's body to Nashville, where a post-mortem exam would be done as soon as possible. Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents Chris Carpenter and Mike Frizzell arrived near midnight. From the appearance of the single wound in Matthew Winkler's back, all the detectives felt the death weapon had been a shotgun, fired from some distance away. There was no gun in the house or yard, though, which meant his murderer must have taken it along with Winkler's family and vehicle. Investigator Rickman gathered and labeled some physical evidence carefully so the chain of evidence could be tracked. Dr. Vinson gave him a single shotgun pellet that he'd found on Winkler's stomach when he lifted his shirt. TBI criminalist Donna Nelson, along with Lauren James, Erica Catherine, and Francesca Sanders, would process every corner of the crime scene. Briefed by Chris Carpenter on what was known so far, the forensic technicians would not find much that would help the investigators. The latent prints, body fluids, hairs, and fibers in the parsonage were traced back to the Winkler family, which, of course, was to be expected. The bedding, sleeping pillows, and decorative pillows were also gathered up, bagged, and labeled. The criminalists and the investigators processed the room where Matthew Winkler's body had lain undiscovered all day Wednesday. It was a nice enough room, with white crown moldings and bifold French doors against a fabric-covered wall. All light was shut out by the closed wooden blinds, and no one could have peered in and seen the minister's body lying there. In contrast to the white woodwork, the Winkler's bedroom set was made of heavy dark wood. There was a sterile feel to the room, as if the occupants hadn't cared enough to do much more than make the bed. It was like the lawn outside, very basic. 3 months after Christmas, a wooden box with snowmen on it remained on a round stand near the bathroom door. The bulb on the lamp next to the bed wouldn't have given off enough light to read by. Maybe it had been used as a nightlight. A combination light and ceiling fan whirled slowly as the investigators worked. They took photos of every corner of the crime scene and then measured the room. When they cut out a large chunk of the wall-to-wall carpet between the bed and the bathroom, they found the subfloor beneath was also deeply stained with blood. Aside from the tangle of blankets Matthew Winkler had been wrapped in and the welter of blood beneath, there was no indication that there had been a struggle there. His autopsy would show that he had been shot just once, in the back as he lay face down, probably in the wide four-poster bed he shared with Mary. He might even have been sound asleep when he was shot, but he had been found lying on his back. Mary, even in desperation, could not possibly have lifted him and turned him over, so he had lived long enough to make that last, massive effort to heave himself out of bed. Perhaps he had been trying to call for help. That would have been impossible. The white phone was on the floor several feet away from him, and its cord was unplugged, not from the wall, but from the phone itself, and the cord was coiled beneath his body. At 3 a.m., a nationwide Amber Alert was sent out by the Tennessee authorities. They used a smiling picture of the Winkler family they'd found in the house to help people recognize Mary and the 3 girls. These alerts are not issued lightly and are used only in cases where law enforcement agencies have reason to believe that the people missing are likely to be in extreme danger. Amber Alerts are usually employed to find missing or kidnapped children. Every possible media outlet now repeated information and descriptions of Mary Winkler and her daughters, and the family's Sienna minivan. The picture of the perfect family flashed across TV screens and appeared on the front page of newspapers again and again. Illuminated signs along freeways also blazed with this information. If the minivan was on the main freeways, surely someone would spot it and call police. But if Mary and her little girls had been abducted, whoever had them would probably know that and switch vehicles soon, or at least steal other license plates, so lawmen had to work fast. Thursday dawned with no sightings of Mary Winkler and her 3 daughters. There were so many places where a minivan, perhaps holding the 4 bodies of the missing members of the family, could be hidden from view. Not knowing was somehow worse than knowing what had happened to them. The Reverend Dan Winkler, Matthew's father, his mother, Diane, his brothers, Dan and Jacob, Mary's father, Clark Freeman, and Mary's 4 adopted brothers and sisters needed every scintilla of their Christian faith as they waited for word, even as they mourned the loss of Matthew. Orange Beach, Alabama. Alabama is almost 350 miles from Selmer, Tennessee, a resort town with white sugar sand beaches on the Gulf of Mexico. Tourism brochures for the Alabama Gulf Coast cities and towns advertise the area as a place to slow down, let loose, rediscover yourself, and let its attractions cast a spell over you. Beyond the beach itself, Orange Beach has a monster theater with continuous filmed footage of sharks and other deadly sea creatures, a mall, a 15-screen theater, a Starbucks, and the South's tallest Ferris wheel. It hardly seemed like a place a killer would take a captive and grieving family. And yet, on the evening of March 23rd, that was where Officer Jason Whitlock of the Orange Beach Police Department spotted a Sienna minivan making an illegal U-turn on Perdido Beach Boulevard. He pulled it over and with standard procedure used his radio to check for wants and warrants on the license plates. The report that came back galvanized him into action. He had stopped the vehicle that had an Amber Alert out for it. Whitlock immediately called for backup, and 3 police units arrived to surround the Winklers' vehicle in the Walmart parking lot. Whitlock had no idea what they might find, and he used great caution as he walked toward the driver's side window. If Mary Winkler and her children, Patricia, Allie, and Brianna, were still alive and hopefully uninjured, he didn't want to do anything that might place them in danger. A kidnapper would probably try to hold them as shields to keep from being arrested. But when Whitlock walked up to the window, he was shocked. A youngish woman who looked very much like the Amber Alert's description of Mary Winkler was at the wheel. 2 little girls and a baby, all mercifully unhurt, were with her. The Orange Beach officer scanned the inside of the minivan quickly, searching for someone who might be hiding there, perhaps covered with a blanket. But there was no one else in the vehicle, and then he spotted a shotgun in its case. None of this made sense. Why wouldn't a kidnapper have taken the weapon with him? The woman identified herself as Mary Carol Winkler. She didn't seem to be afraid or upset. There was only a certain flatness in her effect. She was probably in shock, and she appeared to be exhausted, which could explain her lack of emotion. She had not asked him a single question. It was almost like she was expecting it to happen. Whitlock would recall regarding Mary Winkler's calmness when she saw his police car and his uniform. When he asked Mary if she would come to his department's headquarters, she agreed readily. Her chief concern was for her daughters, and he assured her that they would be well taken care of. It would take so much time to sort out what had happened, but as what was left of the Matthew Winkler family arrived at the police station in Orange Beach, Alabama, one thing was clear. Their lives had changed forever. They had become public people, every detail of their lives sought out by the media. All over America, people who heard the news flash that the Amber Alert had been called off because the missing woman and children had been found were relieved, but still curious about what on earth could have happened back in Selmer, and later, to Mary and the girls. Mary was taken into custody. She didn't object. The girls went along to the police station with her. She was worried that they were hungry, saying she had been on the way to a Waffle House to buy supper for them. The Alabama officers were very concerned for them, too, and brought in food for Mary's daughters from McDonald's, and then found a children's movie for them to watch. Even the investigators were baffled when they realized that it was quite likely that the quiet little woman was not a victim, but a suspect in the shooting of her husband. Why else would she have had the shotgun in her vehicle? What had caused Matthew Winkler's death was relatively easy to determine. Someone had blasted his life away with a shotgun, and Mary Winkler had that shotgun in her possession. Why he became a homicide victim would be far more difficult to figure out. At 10 p.m., far away from home in Orange Beach, Alabama, on the night before the autopsy, Mary Winkler explained what had happened to Corporal Stan Stabler of the Alabama Bureau of Investigation and to Special Agent Steve Stusher of the FBI. At the police station, Stabler read Mary her Miranda rights, advising her that she did not have to talk to him and Steve Stusher, that she could have an attorney present if she liked. And she nodded and said she understood, signing the form to show that. She sat now at a long table in an interview room in the Orange Beach Police Department. A sensitive interview in a pending criminal matter doesn't start out with the questions that detectives are most anxious to ask. Rather, they begin with easier topics. Mary gave her name, Mary Carol Winkler, and then added, "I'm a Freeman maiden name." She told them her address in Selmer, her phone number, and said she wasn't really employed. She was a student at Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee. Mary seemed much more worried about Patricia, Allie, and Brianna than she was about the investigator's questions. Stan Stabler, a big man with reddish blonde hair and a kind face, told her the girls were fine. They had their dinner and were now wrapped cozily in blankets in a nearby room, watching the children's movie. "They're, concerned about Mom," he said. "I told them you were fine and we were fixing to come in here and talk with you, too, and your little girl wants to put my name on her list of names she's got of people she's talked to. So I'm going to get back with her, too." Finally, he now asked Mary when she had left Tennessee. She answered that they had left the day before, in the morning. Wednesday, she added, the 22nd. She said she had driven as far as Jackson, Mississippi, where they stayed overnight at the Fairfield Inn. That would have been a very long drive, 287 miles. At legal speeds, it would have taken her 4.5 hours. When Stabler asked Mary why she had left Selmer, she said she wasn't ready to comment on that. She said she had never been to Orange Beach before, but I wanted to take them to a beach, and I found a straight line. She estimated that they had arrived in Orange Beach an hour or two after lunch on this day, Thursday. "How long were you planning on staying?" "Tonight." She was planning to leave tomorrow, Friday, and drive back to West Tennessee. She had family in East Tennessee, in Knoxville, but she was planning to go to her in-laws' home near Selmer. "How long have you been married?" Stabler asked. 9 years, 11 months. It was so hard to dive in and ask the heavy questions that hung in the air. She clearly didn't want to talk about them. "How was your marriage?" "Good." She said nothing more than that. Stabler could see that Mary was getting cotton-mouthed, and he offered her something to drink. She asked for water, and as she sipped it, they talked about how beautiful the beach was and what roads she had driven south from Selmer. When she seemed calmer, he asked her again about her marriage. She said they hadn't had any major problems. "How were y'all financially?" Getting through." Mary explained that Matthew was a full-time pastor, and his church had a congregation of about 200. His only income was his church salary, and some from speaking engagements, income that was random and couldn't be counted on. Matthew was planning to start on getting his master's degree in the summer, or definitely by fall. "When's the last time you talked to him?" Stabler asked. "Yesterday morning, at home." "What did y'all discuss?" "No real conversation, just no comment," she said. "I don't know." She had come out from where her mind was hiding just a little bit, but now she scurried back. She didn't want to talk about Wednesday morning. Stabler talked quietly to her, asking her to tell him her side of what had happened, what problems she had faced. He asked her to tell him what was troubling her so much. "I just can't right now." "Okay. I feel like you have genuine concern, and I do appreciate you. I'm just not up to that right now." And he did have concern for her, but he was also a detective who was trying to solve a bizarre mystery, and he pressed on. Mary Winkler rambled quite a bit, telling him she had heard children's voices while she was handcuffed in an area of the police station, and then realized it was her own children. "I about did a backflip," she said, "to get out of it because I was in line of sight." She didn't want her children to see her in handcuffs. "Those 3 right there are my only concern right now." She had sent word to Matthew's parents, Nana and Papa, to come and get Patricia, Allie, and Brianna, and they were on the way. She felt she could relax when they arrived because her mother-in-law would take good care of her girls. Stabler asked her if she would tell him what happened. "I haven't been told really anything myself." "I don't know. I've talked with the girls a little bit," he said. "Okay? And they've told me what they've seen and heard." "Right," she said. "I need you to fill in those gaps a little bit," Stabler said. "All 3 know, to an extent, what's taken place." "What did you ask me?" Mary said vaguely. "To tell me what happened, again." She said she wasn't ready to do that yet. As Stabler and Stusher spoke about her children and what the events of the past 24 hours might mean to them, she listened quietly. And when she finally spoke, she talked not of her own complicity, but of her concern for Matthew, and what newspapers might say about him. "No matter what, in the end I don't want him smeared." Mary Winkler talked in circles, saying that she didn't know what words to use to explain what had happened. Sometimes I think something might have happened and then there's no way. Did he hurt you? Not physically. Stan Stabler asked Mary if she knew her husband's condition at the present time, and she said she didn't. Was he alive when you left the house, or do you know for sure? I don't know. Mary, he asked quietly. Why did you shoot him? She didn't answer. Had you planned ahead of time to shoot him, or did it happen just on the spur of the moment? Not planned. Mary's answers came in 1 or 2 words, pulled with agonizing slowness out of a memory that she insisted was blurry. She was not sure of when it had happened. She knew that the shotgun was kept on top of their closet. Matthew had used it to hunt turkeys. She kept saying that she could surely not have shot her husband. She had never shot that gun. She kept denying that she had shot Matthew. But then she went back in her mind to the time when she was driving away from Selmer the day before. Driving down the road, something would go in my head, and I thought there's no way what had just happened. And then I hadn't really seen anything or heard anything. I've used my name everywhere I went, and this was just my last time to be with them, and we were just going to have some fun. I just wanted to be with them before they had bad days. Have a happy day. Mary murmured that she wanted to have one last happy time with her little girls, and that was why she had driven them to the pristine beach on the Gulf of Mexico. Whatever else happened, she wanted them to remember this day they had spent together, having fun, making good memories that she hoped would one day obscure whatever bad memories they had. As vague as she was, she seemed to know she was in a great deal of trouble. So much trouble that she might never be able to spend any happy days with her daughters again, perhaps not until they were grown women. She had planned to get them to Matthew's parents, who were on vacation by Friday. They were good people, she said. They're the family. She spoke now about Matthew. She had been thinking about him and about how he had so many rules and schedules for her to follow, everything in this certain order. I love him dearly, she said, but gosh, he just nailed me to the ground. I was real good for quite some time. My problem was I got a job at the post office a couple of years ago, and the first of our marriage. I just took it like a mouse. Didn't think anything different. My mom just took it from my dad, and that stupid scenario. And I got a job where I had to have nerve and high self-esteem, and I have been battling this for years for some time. At some point, it was really good. Then, I don't know. We moved over a year ago, February '05, and it just came back out for some reason. He would knock your self-esteem down? No. Just chewing whatever. And that's the problem. I have nerve now, and I have self-esteem. So my ugly came out. It was an unfortunate phrase for her to use, and Mary Winkler would hear it repeated over and over in the media in the months to come. My ugly came out. Mary tried to make excuses for Matthew, for what he did to push her over the edge. Even though he had controlled her, kept her on his schedule, undermined her self-confidence, she wanted the 2 investigators to know that Matthew was so good, too. It was just a weakness. I think a lot of times he had high blood pressure, but he'd never go enough to the doctor to get medicine for it. He was a mighty fine person, and that's the thing. There's no sense, you know, she said. Fox News saying some hick-down lady did this, because he was a mean, you know. No sense in that. Just say the lady was a moron, evil woman, and let's go with it. She had opened up to them, and she feared for her girls, although Mary was sure that their Nana, Matthew's mother, would get them through it. She worried for her father, and said she didn't want him devoting his life to her, coming to visit her wherever she was. She didn't know what had set her off yesterday morning. There was no predicting how things would go. I just never know what's coming next. I think we're having a good day, and then bam. I'm nervous about something, and he's aloof about it. But it's just no excuse for anything. But you know, it wasn't just out of the blue either. She hinted that Matthew had threatened her at some point in their marriage, had said something life-threatening, that had really scared her. But then, that was when he was at his absolute worst. They talked for a long time, but Mary recalled few details. She admitted to them that she had shot Matthew, but everything was a total blurb in her memory. She remembered being surprised that the shotgun hadn't had more of a hard kick when she fired it. She knew she had taken the girls with her and left, but she had only packed one thing: a pair of baby socks. She didn't recall why she'd been angry the night before, except that Matthew had gone back on his promise to play Battleship with Patricia. They had started watching a movie, but she had fallen asleep, and that was one of her husband's pet peeves with her. But now she wanted to be fair. She wanted the news media to blame her. There's no reason for him to have anything ugly said about him because I have obviously done something very bad, so let me just, get the bad. That would be my request. Steve Stusher said, "Mary, that's very noble, but very honorable of you to have that attitude. I never spoke up," she said. "It's a two-way thing. I just kept it all inside. It's not healthy, for him, not to have a clue what I thought. That's not fair to him." Suddenly, she asked, "Has there been a funeral yet?" She had clearly lost her sense of time. It had not been 2 days yet, and at this point, her husband's body was awaiting autopsy. Steve Stusher was about to turn off the tape recorder, but he turned to Mary in an attempt to reassure her about her little girls. "Your girls are going to be taken care of, okay? I'll tell you again. They had a great day yesterday. Beautiful," she said. Neither Steve Stusher nor Stan Stabler commented on the pain that the 3 girls would undoubtedly face for the rest of their lives. It seemed kinder to let Mary Winkler believe that she had been a good mother, perhaps for the last time. The Reverend Dan Winkler and his wife, Diane, had raced to Alabama to take charge of Patricia, Allie, and Brianna. Clearly, Mary liked and trusted them, and she was relieved to know that her girls were safe with them. When her father-in-law first saw Mary in handcuffs in Orange Beach, he murmured, "I'm so sorry for all this." Mary, still stoic and strangely flat emotionally, just stared at him. "I wish we could take the handcuffs off," Dan Winkler said, "and I could give you a big bear hug." At that point, Mary lifted her arms, her wrists still bound together by the cuffs, and reached toward Dan Winkler. He told her he loved her, his instincts and training taking over as he comforted her. Even though their son was dead, the elder couple was not ready to condemn this little woman who had been a daughter to them for almost 10 years. Forgiveness? Dan Winkler could not bring himself to do that, not yet. His belief, based on the Bible, was that a person had to have a broken and contrite spirit be penitent and confess his or her sin. He knew that his daughter-in-law had shot his son. Ironically, it had happened on Dan Winkler's birthday the day before, but he didn't yet know why it had happened. The post-mortem examination of the body of Matthew Winkler took place at the State of Tennessee Center for Forensic Medicine in Nashville, Tennessee, under the direction of McNairy County Medical Examiner Andrew Eason, M.D., forensic pathologist Stacy A. Turner, M.D., an assistant medical examiner, performed the autopsy with Amy McMaster, M.D., observing. It began on March 24, 2006 at 9:30 a.m., approximately 36 hours after the young minister's body was discovered. Rigor mortis had begun to stiffen his body, but was not yet complete. The red and purple markings on the portion of the body that had been the lowest, where blood had pooled when his heart stopped beating, were fixed and complete on his back and buttocks, with blanching along the parts that had touched the floor of the Winkler's bedroom. There would be few surprises in this autopsy. Matthew Winkler had only one real wound, along with some scratches on the front of his right knee and lower leg, perhaps made as he crawled on the floor in a vain attempt to escape his killer. He had been shot in the back by a weapon far enough away that there was no soot around the wound. In the middle of the back is a 3/4 inch in diameter shotgun wound of entrance with slight irregular margins and an irregular 1/16 to 1/8 inch circumferential marginal abrasion. The defect is located 21.5 inches below the top of the head and at the posterior midline. 5 evenly spaced half-inch by half-inch rectangular abrasions surround the defect. As dictated by Dr. Turner, the defect left by the shotgun shell sounded clinical and had no emotion. But the fatal wound was horrific, of course, as all shotgun wounds are. Pellets of birdshot and wadding from the contents of a shotgun shell had blasted into Matthew's back. After it perforated his skin, fatty tissue, and the muscles in his back, the birdshot cut through 4 ribs in the middle of his back and tore through the lower lobe of his left lung, his diaphragm, stomach, spleen, pancreas, and left adrenal gland. There were contusions in the upper lobe of his left lung and the lower lobe of his right lung, and 2 of the vertebrae in his spinal column were broken. His trachea, windpipe, and lungs were awash in aspirated blood, and his stomach held 100 milliliters of blood. White foam from his ruined lungs had bubbled from his nose and mouth. Carefully, Dr. Turner collected scores of pellets of the birdshot and the plastic wadding from his internal organs. Whoever had held the shotgun had stood above Matthew. The trajectory of the birdshot could be traced from his back to the front of his body and from right to left and slightly downward. Dr. Turner estimated that he might have lived a very short time before he lost a tremendous amount of blood from all these wounds. Matthew Winkler had appeared to be a healthy young man, although he had fat around his belly. His heart valves and other aspects of his heart were normal, and on first look, his heart seemed okay. However, a silent killer had been at work, surely shortening his lifespan, even without the violence of a shotgun blast. At the age of 31, all of Matthew Winkler's major coronary arteries were 50% narrowed with calcified plaque. He probably had not yet suffered symptoms from this blockage of blood flow in his heart, but he would almost certainly have died young if he didn't change his eating and exercise habits. It didn't matter anymore. In a thorough post-mortem examination, all of the body's systems are checked. Some findings may seem unimportant at the time, but become vital later on. There was no food in Matthew's stomach or any tablets or capsules. His bladder was extremely distended, holding 1,000 milliliters of clear light yellow urine. Blood samples from his heart and vitreous humor from the eyes were taken and labeled for tests to determine the presence of alcohol or drugs. Almost 2 months later, the results came back. Every single test, from alcohol to barbiturates, stimulants, amphetamines, sleeping pills, cocaine, marijuana, and even aspirin, came back negative. He hadn't ingested any of them in the period before he was killed. None of them were present in his blood and vitreous humor, not even in a half-life stage. Dr. Turner's summary of the case of the death of the Reverend Matthew Winkler was succinct and to be expected. Autopsy reveals a penetrating shotgun wound of the back. A flower-shaped wad abrasion surrounds the entrance defect. In my opinion, the cause of death is a shotgun wound of the torso. The manner of death is homicide,